It's a rainy morning, but I'm trying to be sunny as possible, donning two of our national colors and everything. I hope everybody is doing great. I hope you're staying warm and dry in this weather. We complain a lot about the heat in the summer. So this rain has us under a kind of neck lock right now, but give thanks. It's cool, isn't it? We give thanks for cool air and all of that. So just welcome again to everyone. I am Suzette Campbell, Corporate Communications Manager at the Jamaica Business Development Corporation, and I'll be your moderator today as we explore global case studies in successful craft development. And it is my pleasure to introduce our speaker for today, who is a part of the JBDC family, and she is Janine Fletcher Taylor. And I'm going to tell you just a little bit about her before I hand over to her. All right. So Janine has an illustrious educational background, um, diploma in hospitality and tourism management from the Institute of Management and Production, IMP, diploma in business administration from the University of Technology, Bachelor of Science in Finance and Accounting from University of London, postgraduate diploma in development management and poverty alleviation, also from the University of London. And she is a member of the Chartered Institute of Marketing. Now, Jadine started working at a very early age at Grace Kennedy Export Trading. She also moved on to working in sales, which she didn't quite enjoy, but it was particularly preparing her for where she's at today at a place called Nuff Things, a distributor of major music labels, records, and books about the music industry. And it was there that she became indoctrinated in the importance of Jamaican culture. Today, she is the marketing services manager at the Jamaica Business Development Corporation, where she started working as a marketing assistant way back in 2001. With more than 20 years experience in the gift and craft industry, she has a strong passion for the development of local artisans for whom her team aims to secure market access primarily through the Things Jamaican brand and its subsidiaries. Now, as you may be aware, Things Jamaican is the retail store chain that retails only in authentic Jamaican made products. And it's located at our head office here at 14 Camp Road, as well as the Norman Manley International Airport and the Devon House, the historic Devon House. And earlier this year, we launched the website, the e-commerce site for Things Jamaican, which is thingsjamaicanshopping.com. All right, TJ, as we affectionately call it, has been around since the 1960s. And earlier this year, JBDC and Things Jamaican, on behalf of the ministry, formerly Ministry of Industry, Commerce, Agriculture and Fisheries, launched the National Craft Policy, which is set to change the way we do craft business in this country. JBDC is tasked with leading much of that implementation on the ground. And one of the things we're doing is educating our audience through initiatives like the JBDC Virtual Gift and Craft Biz Zone. So, ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, I hand you over to Janine Fletcher Taylor, Global Case Studies in Successful Craft Development.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I am hoping that you're having a fabulous day. And I'm going to just jump right into our subject matter for today, which is the aspect of case study, reviewing case studies and seeing how things are done in other countries and identifying some strategies that maybe we can adopt or innovate on and all of that. So I'm going to try to do this presentation in 3 segments. Because we're a development agency, we want to make sure that when we interact through these webinars with our participants, we're not just talking, we're not just talking and giving you information, but also equipping you to identify some skill sets and tools that you can also do on your own to enhance your knowledge base and to improve your businesses. So one of the things I want to touch on is why case studies are important and how we can go about looking for types of case studies that are relevant to our unique businesses. Then I'm going to touch on 3 case studies because I'm speaking to a diverse audience. Really what we're going to do is just to extract some key learnings from these case studies as a general expose on the sector itself, the industry. And from there, we'll be challenging persons. So if we have jurors in the house, we will be challenging you to go out now and to search for case studies specific to your type of product and your type of situation, because it is important to ensure that the case studies that you're reviewing are relevant to your context. All right, so let me just go ahead and share my screen. All right, so why are we talking about case studies? This is going to be one of many such discussions that we're going to have, because when you look at the implementation of the craft policy, one of the key objectives that we want to achieve is the exportation of the products and services that will be generated from this industry. And if we're going to go into a global space, we're going to quickly identify that what may be happening in other countries may be somewhat different from the experiences that we have been having here locally with our tourism industry. Primarily, the main market source for our local industry at this point is the tourism industry, and that requires persons to come to the island, visit, and take away souvenirs and tokens with their luggage and everything else, versus being in their own spaces and looking for products and services that they think would be satisfying their unique needs. And when you're going into that global space, you're going to encounter several different countries doing the same thing. So we need to first and foremost understand what it is we are seeking to achieve and what is happening in that environment. So why would we want to be reinventing the wheel if there are numerous other persons, other countries and entities that are already exporting and are successful at it? We don't want to reinvent the wheel. We want to understand what is unique about their situation, how does it relate to our situation, and how we can adopt some of the principles and learnings from their experience in going into global markets. The other thing is that case studies provide insight into what has worked and what has not worked and the key lessons learned. So, if you are seeking to do something that has already been done, you want to avoid some of the pitfalls which would have been highlighted in these case studies. And even yourself, you may become a case study at some point in time, and hopefully we will be able to learn from each other as we seek to expand in this market, right? And how well do the case studies compare to your own context? Is it applicable? And one of the things I tried to make sure of when I identified the case studies that I'll be sharing with you is the first thing I looked for were case studies for SMEs, because in our local context, the majority of the players in the industries are small, micro, and medium firms. So what we'll be sharing with you today is well within your reach. It is not something that is outside of what we know to be our situation. And so if they can do it, you can do it. And that's a general message. It also inspires thinking and innovative capabilities. And we want to look at innovation, not just in terms of innovating the products that we're making, but look at innovating the ways in which we go about getting into markets, innovate the ways we do business. One of the main things that you will see coming out of these case studies is the matter of collaboration and how critical collaboration was for the success of these countries and their ability to have a robust gift and craft industry. There's no one firm that is going to tackle the global market and succeed just so. So even if you're not the method of collaboration, whether it is just sharing ideas, whether it is producing together, whether it is procuring raw materials, collaboration is key. And so we will be looking at how they went about collaborating. It encourages and motivates risk taking. So if you're in the development stage of your businesses right now, you have some ideas that you think you want to explore, then we would encourage you to look at the internet sources that can help you to see how you can structure that idea if it's a similar idea to what you are thinking. And be sure to look at multiple cases, because each case study is unique to what occurred in that particular situation. So you want to look at multiple case studies of a similar kind and put them all together to see what those learnings were. All right. So the first one that we're going to look at, we are going to look at these case studies just in terms of the country that it's coming out of and some of the key success factors, the success factors that were identified as the reason why they were successful in becoming major exporters of gift and craft items. And in the case of Tunisia, there was not enough information for me to share as with the other two, but I thought that the 4 points that they raised are probably points that we need to zone in on when we start to implement the policy itself, and some of the key areas that we need to pay attention to, because these areas really bolster the success outcome. And the first thing that was picked up with this case study is and this is Tunisia in its entire form, the country itself and what they did. And one of the things they pointed out was the investing in production equipment. Now, in the case of Tunisia, they were going after large volume exports. So outside of the fact that these were small firms grouping together to supply a particular market, they wanted to ensure that the price points that they were coming out at was competitive. And they recognized that in the handicraft industry, the price of the inputs were very high. And so in order for them to have a successful export strategy, the country needed to invest in production equipment, and not just invest in equipment, but to transition persons that were using traditional forms of production techniques into using these types of equipment. So right away, we know that no matter what subsector of the gift and craft industry you're working in, whether it is ceramics, whether it is fashion, jewelry, whatever, you should constantly be looking at what types of equipment have been introduced to the production system that can help you to either improve efficiency or reduce cost. Because ultimately, if it costs you $10 to make the item, you really can't sell it at $5, even though that is the price that the average market price is at. So you're going to have to find ways to reduce that cost. It's an upfront cost to invest in equipment, but over the long run, you have the ability to put out far more units, far more efficiency and more assurances where quality is concerned, because that was one of the points that was raised in that case study, that the introduction of production equipment improved the quality and consistency of the products that they were exporting. And that was something that the buyers were very keen on observing, because that's a weakness when we are talking about handcraft items. The consistency and the quality assurance is something that is hampered because it is being done by hand. So we want to pay attention to our production equipment, and if we are using the most efficient and modern tools in our production. They also spoke about the need for appropriate staffing and skills training. And the thing about skills training is that because this industry is one that you can enter into with a gift or a talent, you can be classified as an intuitive artisan. It's not necessary for you to have gone to school to learn. You could have just been watching your grandfather and learning the trade. That's a typical characteristic of the craft industry, that it is handed down from generation to generation, and these techniques are taught to the children and so on and so forth. With that said, however, contemporary items, products that are classified in the contemporary market space, are able to attract higher prices and are more saleable. And when you start going into the contemporary market, you are going to have to constantly be innovating. So sometimes these skill sets that are passed on through generations cannot transition to enable product development. So you want to ensure that, and this was consistent across all the case studies, persons involved in the gift and craft industry that is successful is consistently and improving their skill sets and learning new techniques constantly, because those techniques help them to transition new product ideas and go into the contemporary market space, which is somewhat different from the traditional craft market space, because the traditional techniques are not necessarily what is being demanded in the market right now. It has a harder sell. You have to do the whole background and the history, and sometimes it is more effective to be able to merge the traditional with the contemporary. So skill sets and continuous learning techniques, and the staff members that you are employing to your team. I know we are SMEs, so we have an order to fill, and we bring in some skill to help us to fill the order, but we are not ensuring that the staff members that we have on board are going to training sessions and learning the skill sets in a technical way versus just watching and adapting, right? You have a lot of cost associated with that because a lot of mistakes are likely to be made. The next thing that is very consistent across the case studies is that they targeted export markets. And earlier I pointed out that when we were looking at the industry, our local context, very few persons in their business models and the plans for their business intended to go into export. It was not something that they readily identified with the craft industry. What we identify with the craft industry is it's a tourism type product, and we have a booming tourism industry, and persons will come and we will have the craft markets and we will sell to them. What that means is that if we were to look at the tourism numbers coming to Jamaica, it's really just that drop in the bucket in terms of the global market. So if you're going to look at Jamaica now becoming a force to reckon with in the industry globally, we have to get our minds and our businesses geared at export markets. That does not necessarily mean that you're going to have to sell volumes and volumes, but it means that you're going to have access to all different types of customers and have access to persons, so that when we have a situation such as COVID here now, where the tourism market is very susceptible to the environment. If we have a storm, if we have an economic crisis, then the numbers stop coming and we have a trickle down and a kind of multiplier effect. So when you go into export markets, it sort of mitigates that risk, and it helps you to be able to look at exploring different types of products that you can transition your business into if the ones that you're making now are no longer relevant to the market space, right? So target exports in your business model from day one. Start thinking about how you're going to get that product over into the next country and not just focus on our local context. They also looked at how SMEs were able to adopt certain strategies that large firms took on, because there is a view that the mindset of the SME believes that certain things, certain types of business practices are not necessary for them because they are not big companies. And that's a big issue. So things like formalization, staff training, the base things that are basic processes in large companies. These practices were not being adopted by the smaller firms. The smaller firms were more focused on just production and selling. And that was not going to help them to transition as an industry to say they are forced to reckon with. So from day one, small firms need to be looking at mirroring what is happening in large firms. And a good example for that is, say, large firms have board of directors. Now, what is the value of having a board of directors? How relevant is that to us, a micro firm? You may not need a board of directors, but you certainly need to have access to advisors and technical skills that can come in and give you support to expand, because we at the end of the day, we're looking to expand these businesses. So at the beginning of at the onset of the formation of that business, you need to have a large firm mindset. So for Tunisia, those were the four things that they identified as the main determinants of their successes in exporting craft. I'm going to look now at a particular case study that I identified coming out of India. And what is interesting is that when we had our consultations with persons, one of the main complaints was the importation of craft products. And the importation of craft products were coming from countries such as India, Pakistan, and so on. And the view was that it's unfair competition because they are able to produce at large volumes, cheaper prices, and so on. But when you look at the case study that's coming out of this particular segment, this is a combination of 5,000 small firms, 5,000 micro firms within a particular geographic location, deciding that they were going to focus on metalware as the only type of craft item that they would produce. So they had the resource, the raw material source was available to them based on their ecology and what was in their environment. They had many firms that were making different types of metalware items, and they decided that they were going to look at collaborating to produce same item to fill large export orders. So the first thing that I zoned in on that was interesting was the countries that they were exporting to. And a lot of times we deal with clients who say that they want to look at export. And yes, there is the idea that America is close, it's easy to export, it's close. You have friends and family members there that can help you to access the market. But when we talk about handicraft and those sorts of products, that's not necessarily where the main markets that have the high demand for these products are. And when I looked at the listing here, we have Germany, we have France, we have Italy, we have Australia, we have Japan, and Canada. Perhaps Canada is the only one that we would normally hear a client say, that's the market I want to get into. And so maybe we are not looking at the right markets. Maybe we need to look at the world. I mean, Australia, it never crossed my mind to think of Australia as a country to target for exporting craft. But this particular type of craft, metalware, was something that was in high demand in these countries, and they formed the top 6 countries that they are exporting these products to. The other sub-markets that they identified were the United Arab Emirates, USA, Netherlands, UK, and so on. But the top 6 were the ones I mentioned before. So essentially in this part of India, Moradabad, I'm not going to try to pronounce that, they formed a cluster of 5,000 firms, micro firms, majority of them led by single owners, and they represent a total of 20% of craft exports coming out of India. So this 20% is considered very high in terms of the overall exports of craft items in India. And they track it there. 5,000 producers coming together to decide to make only art metalware. And in addition to deciding to make only art metalware, focus specifically on garden accessory and worship items. When I saw worship items, I'm like, it makes sense given the countries that they were exporting to. So we're talking about maybe urns and crosses and their different gods and so on that they worship and so on. This was identified as a particular market segment that they could make these products for because there was a high demand for it. Garden accessories was the same. So and when you think about garden accessories, you're thinking about items from ranging from very small, very simple to very large and extravagant sculpting pieces in their garden. So these countries find gardening, this is a serious business, and they only focus on those two areas. So the successes that they had contributing to 20% of the craft export came out of those two product categories in one specific type of craft production, which is metalware, right? Now, what their strategy was to zone in on this particular technique and market space and perfect it. Because in focusing on that, these 5,000 entrepreneurs that were involved would have built up specific capacities specific to metalware. And they would have done the kind of development work and exporting over time, and they were able to carve out a huge market share for metalware. So the buyers in these countries, when they were thinking of purchasing metalware, would specifically look to them because they were now known as the experts in this type of product. So, I mean, I don't know what Jamaica would focus on, but this is something that requires a lot of discipline, requires a lot of collective action and going after market in such a way that they are now major market shareholders in this specific type of craft development item. They also looked at reducing overheads to compete overseas because one of the things they highlighted was that the type of products that were being made were easily replicable. And I know that we are very concerned a lot of times about making products and persons copying it and so on. That is not going to be something that you can avoid per se once you get into the conversation about the global market, because it's going to be difficult for you to track all of that. But at the same time, they recognized that these products were easily replicable, and because they were focusing on metalware, were able to constantly be innovating new products and differentiating. And so the other thing that they focused on was ensuring that based on what was in the market space, their products were differentiated, and they were differentiating in a very, very tight market space, which was garden accessories and worship items. Right? So they were not just differentiating in gift and craft and making something that nobody else is making. They were very focused. The other thing that I pulled out, which I think we are going to have to pay a lot of attention to that as we really take the development of the craft industry serious, is that there was a focus on branding. And the branding was at the individual firm level. So there was a brand for each of these 5,000 firms that the buyers could understand and develop an attachment to. And then there was the branding of this particular zone in India, which I won't try to pronounce the name again, but that name, that particular region of India was branded in the products that were being exported. So if we were to look at our local context, we typically think of branding things Jamaica, made in Jamaica. But then we have St. Thomas, and then within in St. Thomas, we have Morant Bay. And then maybe within Morant Bay, there's another unique branding opportunity that we can zone in on. And so what that does is that it creates a sort of emotional connection to whatever the story that brand is telling. So they had multiple layers of branding from the individual firm and from the region itself. And the part I want us to pay attention to is that they were branding from the region, from the province or whatever it is that that region, that particular area was known for. And that is something that we need to look at because we do have a tourism, our tourism market when they come to Jamaica is segmented. There are persons who prefer going to Port Antonio and being an eco-tourist and so on. So there's that market. There are persons who want to go to St. Elizabeth to get a more eclectic experience. And then there's the hardcore mainstream persons that would go to Montego Bay and so on. It's the same principle that if we are looking at branding, why not entreat them to fall in love with St. Elizabeth? Right, as a sub-brand of Jamaica, because that was something that they did, and they told a huge story about that particular region that the products were coming from. The other thing that was we spoke about what they focused on. So as it relates to what is applicable to our context, these were some of the success pointers that I think are very relevant to our local context, and there are areas that we are not paying attention to. We certainly are not focused. We really can't say what is Jamaican gift and craft dominant in terms of, is it wood carvings, is it ceramics, what are we dominant in, and what can we say we are experts in? Are we looking at other sub brands of the Jamaican brand to bring attention to our unique spaces? So hope that was helpful and will kind of get us starting to think of some of the strategies that we can use. The other case study that I thought was very informative was very thorough in how they explained why they were successful. So let me give you a little context. So this is South Africa, and specifically we are zoning in on Cape Town. And what was happening, what is unique about their situation is that they have a lot of unrest, specifically related to racism and classism. So the firms that were participating in the exporting of craft items out of Cape Town, 80% of them were white-owned businesses. And what they did was to analyze what was making these firms successful and identified Black-owned businesses that were not as successful and applied the similar principles to see if it was, because the suggestion was that it was because there was inequality and the whites had, more opportunities to become successful businesses. So they decided that they were going to apply some of the techniques and strategies being used by these dominant firms with Black-owned smaller firms. And the result was that these Black-owned smaller firms became a large portion of the other 20% of just successful businesses exporting from out of Cape Town. So it removed the barrier of class and race and made it about business development practices, because majority of the suggestions that are being made and what is being said is affecting the success comes down to just basic business practices. So what are these business practices that made them successful? The first thing is that formal entities are more likely to receive government support than informal companies. And naturally so, because government support comes from taxation. in the main. And so if they are going to look at dispersing financial aid or supporting export as a composite export strategy, they are going to look at firms that are formalized. It's not a, ignoring of the firms that are not formal, but it just makes economic sense. And so what would have happened is that in order to become supported by the government and the initiatives that the government would have been funding and the funding that they were bringing in from donor agencies, the firms had to be formalized. Bringing them into the formalization system supported the country doing an export strategy, because it was now not just exporting from the individual firms, but exporting from the country as a unified export strategy and how they were going to tackle global markets. Formalization, as simple as it seems, is something that gives the government information and structure in order for them to support the industry. And so that was something that they looked at when they were comparing the firms that were failing. This case study looked a lot at comparing firms that were failing versus firms that were successful in exporting. And one of the key points was there was a particular characterization of informal firms. So, for example, one of the points was 30% of the firms were located in business districts close to craft markets where they were supported by infrastructure and services. When you look at the companies and the firms that were located in those zones, they were the formal businesses because they could own a structure, they could operate legally, there was no issue with them doing business. While the firms that were informal typically had to operate in lower, in areas that did not have commerce, that did not have markets, that have people coming, they were not supported by things like transportation, roads, and things like that, because they were operating in an informal way and they were not supported within the government framework. So that is something that we have to look at formalization, take away the idea that formalization is just about paying tax, and look at it from the context of just basic business management principles, because this was a central theme throughout the entire case studies that were explored, because the craft sector is known to have a high level of informality, and that informality transcends in informal business practices. It transcends in informal ways of engaging the market. The informality affects everything, not just, just being registered or known as a registered company. The other thing was, based on the strategies that they employed, they became global leaders in contemporary African craft. And the classification of contemporary is seeming to attract higher value markets, higher demand, because the products are now not what would we call decorative, but they are more incorporated in the normal way of life. So you have a larger market segment that is purchasing contemporary African craft versus, again, traditional crafts, similar to the case study in Tunisia. So we have to now look at what is, I would have to call in my technical team now, maybe to do a session on what is the distinction between contemporary craft and traditional craft, so that if we are operating more in the traditional space, then we maybe need to shift our product focus to contemporary craft items. We spoke about where the businesses were located. Majority of our list of clients here at JBDC that we support, majority of them come from Kingston. But we know that the persons that are really hardcore in producing craft items are in deep rural parts of this country, and some of those products are off the chain. But we can get to them if we were to give them an order, we really don't know how we're going to get the items. And when we start factoring the cost of accessing that producer or the cost of that producer accessing market spaces, then what you have is a kind of subsistence kind of living on craft, which is really just to support basic meals and basic existence, and not necessarily the kind of earning that potential that you can get from craft if your establishment or you have access or you are located in what they call commercial belts, where you have access to banks, you have access to transportation, you have access to raw material, you can transition quickly to fill orders, you can get staff, appropriate staff to come and work with you because they can come to work easily. I thought that this point was really interesting because I'm not sure as business owners in the creative, because you can make these products anywhere, and you have peace and quiet in the deep, recesses of the country. But then having made that, do you have a system of supplying, of getting these products noticed, getting persons aware of them so that they can buy them? And how easy it is for you to access raw materials if you were to get a quick order. And so these are some things that we may take for granted, but it was identified as a major ingredient in their successes. The other point I took out was 80% of the white owners were classified as high-risk takers. And this is speaking to mindset now. So there were really no guarantees. There are really no guarantees when you're looking to get into any market, not just craft, any business market that you are seeking to get into. It's a risk. And while we encourage persons to look at risk, don't look at risk as in, okay, I have identified risk, so I won't do it. It's really identifying risk, knowing that risk is good. You're going to fail at some of the things, but it doesn't mean that the business has failed. But the majority of the successful entrepreneurs coming out of Cape Town were classified as high risk takers, willing to branch out and just go and just go after it, and considering themselves competitive enough to take on exporting. The other system that was identified coming out of this Cape Town study was that the formal firms often subcontracted informal firms. And so you had formal craft enterprises making products, but they were hiring informal craft producers to make the products. Reason for that? Because of the informality, those businesses were not able to demand a certain price for their labor and the products that they were making. So the formal firms would just purchase the products from the informal firms because it was cheaper to do so than to produce, and they would brand it with their brands, and they would also include in their brand message now that they were social enterprises because they were now supporting informal firms. So that was kind of taking the matter of informality and to help informal firms to graduate into the formal system by collaborating more successful formal firms with informal micro firms. Why is it important for an informal firm to see this as an opportunity? Well, in this process of engaging informal firms, a formal firm would come with maybe a product idea or a collection of products, and they would say to the informal producers, make this product. In doing so, the informal producers would be now developing skill sets to make certain types of products. They would also be able to gradually transition their business processes into more formal systems for them to be able to graduate. But the idea that informal firms were collaborating with formal firms to, to come together and produce, because the formal firms were stronger at branding and had more access, and then now utilizing the informal firms. That type of collaboration is not something that is quite evident here in Jamaica, I'm not sure. And the fact that they were able to look at themselves as social enterprises and not just large firms, because in accessing these informal small firms, they would be looking at maybe at-risk youth, women who were poor, you know, in poorer, more impoverished areas, and they were now bragging or able to support their branding by saying they were contributing to social development. So this would be a message to maybe the formal firms in our ecosystem here, really looking into adopting some of the more informal producers, looking at not just, they did not hire them as staff. And that was something that I realized. They were not hired as staff. They were contracted to the formal entities to produce on their behalf. And in doing so, the industry itself matured because they were, you know, cross-training and teaching new skills to persons who were not able to access that before. One of the things that was also important, if I think I went through about 20 case studies, and the whole thing about social networks, and we are going to touch on that in one of the other webinars when we talk about our craft associations, our groups, our community-based groups, and so on. They talk about the importance of these, what they classify them as social networks. And so it's not so much just to say that I am a member of this association, but what they would do is that they would have meetings with the coming together of minds and sharing of ideas. And when you look at how they merge the traditional art forms into contemporary spaces, they needed the traditional artisans to explain and express what went into those traditional art forms so that they could translate it effectively into a contemporary market without losing that element of tradition and culture and uniqueness in the contemporary products. And they identify social networks as a way that they were able to coordinate, a way that they were able to lobby for certain things, a way that they were able to bring more persons into the business net pool so that collectively Cape Town could now be identified as one of the major exporters coming out of Africa for craft production. And so when you look at informal firms, you find that they are not necessarily connected to a social network. And so that was another case for formalization. The other factor was that innovation. The innovation that they speak about here was not solely focused on product development innovation. It was looking at innovative ways of accessing markets, innovative ways of designing training modules to teach arts and design. The innovation in product development was, the emphasis was on design, not necessarily product type. So they innovated within the context of design. So yes, we'll be doing jewelry, but the innovation now was focused on how the design components could be innovated to create differentiation and to attract higher prices. So the case for skilled persons now, persons who actually went to art school, went and learned jewelry making, went in and have the technical know-how in design, would have been merged with the persons who are producing to create a high level of innovation coming out of this group. They would have more discussions with staff. So that was something that was identified in terms of how they did business. They would have regular interactions with staff to get product ideas and input about what was taking place in the belly of these organizations that could affect them. They attended more trainings. And this was not just local trainings. They would have been more willing to go out and explore what was happening into the markets that they were looking to enter. They undertook business planning and conducted significant research and development. So these were features that they identified that resulted in them developing and coordinating what they call accessing a global value chain. What that means is that there is a global value chain for jewelry, a particular kind of jewelry. Let's say that. And this was a value chain that they were going to seek to access. And that value chain means that they may be giving something to an importer who is going to add some kind of value to it and sell it as a different product. So they were looking at how were they going to access these global value chains, not just access markets. They were looking at specific value chains that they would tap into, and they were looking at training staff persons to ensure that they were able to produce and innovate, and they encouraged a lot of dialogue, and they looked at innovation specifically in the context of design. Informal firms do not exchange knowledge. The exchange of knowledge. So let us say, for example, a project is a donor agency has issued a call for producers to benefit from a particular project. What they identified was that the information did not circulate outside of the social networks, because any donor that has funding that's going to support is going to go after a body, whether it is an association, an agency, or a government supporting agency of some kind. And if you are not attached to any of these networks, the information flow, you may have an excellent product, they might be doing some kind of export strategy, something, the information flow would not come to you. And so they were not exposed to content, new thinking, new ideas, new trends. They were not exposed to designs, product development techniques, and they were relying mainly on what they observed in the environment. One of the examples they used was, if I'm in a particular environment and I see a billboard, I might be influenced or what's the word I'm looking for? I might be inspired by what I am seeing. So as an artisan, if you are not going out and seeing things, traveling, going on the internet, meeting with persons who have traveled, hearing the exchange of ideas and knowledge, then you will be simply boxed into what you know. And that is going to limit your capability to innovate and transition and pivot and all those wonderful things that the firms that are getting out there and getting information and a part of a social network were able to benefit from. So I like the fact that they brought up this thing about knowledge exchange, because typically when we think about a meeting, for example, of a craft association, I'm really looking forward to that session to hear what are some of the things that are discussed in that meeting. Is it just I don't know. What is it? Is it what's trending out there? Can we come up with a strategy as a group to go after something based on the information that is coming in? Do we get international speakers to come and talk to us about what they're looking for when they're looking to buy products? So the knowledge exchange was a deliberate set of activities to share information with the players in that particular group. They also found that, with that said, we had a lot of persons imitating product designs versus creating new and innovative designs. So because there was a lack of exposure, and we can I think we can safely say that we are guilty of that. So if I'm in a particular craft market with a particular craft group and we are producing roosters, I automatically believe that roosters, I saw my colleagues selling roosters, so I'm going to start making roosters. So basically, the product development was influenced in the informal sector by imitation, which was not a successful approach to product development, versus being inspired by the information that was coming in to innovate new ideas and new products. So they were constantly differentiating and coming up with new product ideas just by simply being exposed to what is happening in a global space, and not just limiting our knowledge and information to our unique environment. So we tend to do that as Jamaicans. We say, in Jamaica, we like this. We like a particular thing, and Jamaicans will buy it. But is that the case in global markets if we say, no, we want to export? Do we know what is happening in those markets? Do we even understand their lifestyle, how they live? And that was what was influencing the innovation that was taking place in this group. And it was able to bring them into the market as a totally differentiated type of art and craft, right? The other thing was contemporary artists, and I think I mentioned that in some of the other case studies, that contemporary artisans were able to attract higher price points than persons who were doing traditional craft items or just items that they know will be selling over the years. So transitioning to contemporary markets is a big thing. Successful firms had their own brands and invested in branding. So again, branding was another key success factor. I will summarize when I get to the last slide what were some of the consistent pointers. They were more open to new market opportunities. And I think when I discussed the Indian case study, I looked at some of the markets that we typically, I've never really heard a client come in and say, I am targeting Germany as the market that I want to export to. And that's mainly because we don't know much about them, don't know much about the market. But what is being suggested here is that those markets are the ones that are more likely to import art and craft items, right? So we need to identify which markets are most suitable for the type of products that we're selling. So they were more open to new market opportunities. Firms who export were more likely to innovate because in exporting, you're going to interact with buyers. And once the buyer is confident in your capability to do business, then they will transition to the relationship aspect of the buyer and supplier relationship. And they will start suggesting product ideas to you that they know that their customers will be attracted to. So persons who were already exporting were more likely to innovate over time and constantly innovate their businesses, right? So export, again, target export because it expands the capability for your business to grow and for the industry overall to succeed. And I did speak about it. So what do I want to do we're just touching the surface. We're just looking at, as a region or as a country, what are some of the key things that we can look to exploring for success? What I would challenge the participants to do so that then the information doesn't just come and it just sits and it doesn't go anywhere is to never stop. Don't stop at listening here in the session, but learn and apply. Go out and research. Don't see research as something that is for big firms. If it's even just to sit down and I am going to challenge the participants to dedicate at least 2 days in any given month in their businesses, just to sit down and explore what is happening in the global space in terms of trends and how people are doing business and how they are getting out there, and see how best that these case studies can fit into their improving their businesses. Be comfortable with research, because the information flow comes from research, but research is not necessarily an academic exercise. Sometimes it could be just traveling to another place and doing a lot of observation, talking to persons who travel, looking at content on our social media that can give you a sense of what is happening, where's the market going, because the market will shift away from a product real quick, and you have built your entire business on this thing. And so by the time you figure it out that the market is no longer interested in that product, you are left behind and your business is struggling. Be comfortable with research. Dedicate 2 days of your business month to conducting research to improve your businesses and to understand markets. One of the key success factors is understanding your markets. Understanding your market. So they speak about informal producers being inspired by what they see. So if they see another producer making something, they are inspired to go into that craft item and make those craft items because they're inspired by what they see. What you should be inspired by is what the market is doing. What is the behavior in the market space? So we have COVID now, we have the behavior is that more persons are working from home. How can you identify, what kind of behaviors can you identify in that situation that can inspire your product development ideas and innovation? Not being inspired just by, because this is something that they spoke about, that creatives, they are inspired by an internal creative process. I'm not an artisan, so I can't tell, but I can imagine that there's something that inspires you, but they are not necessarily engaging with what the market is being inspired by. And when the market is inspired by something, that's what they spend money on. Hence the reason why their understanding of markets led to the successful establishment of their craft industry. And some of the takeaways: experiment with at least one idea that is inspired by your research and test it on the market. We spoke about risk earlier. You do the research and you get a product idea. Test at least one product idea that you get from the research information. Don't just gather the information and sit on it and try to apply your existing product line to it. Look at the information and see if you can create an idea simply by what if research is telling you, and test it on the market. Be willing to take some risk. Join a group or association and discuss ideas and exchange knowledge based on your own experiences. That cross conversation, as simple as it is, very doable, but we don't do it. Get formalized and research what support is given to your industry as a formal entity. Start thinking about export and selling your products in new and unusual markets, markets that you would not necessarily know anything about, and start to get to know those markets. Try to understand how those consumers behave. Collaboration for product quantities, to share ideas, and to build value chains. And there are other reasons why they collaborate. So you don't have to collaborate to produce. You can just collaborate to access a particular buyer, collaborate to access a market, collaborate to build value chains with your raw materials, sources, and so on. Consider export markets and research what is needed in those other markets. Consider contemporary product design ideas based on trends. Do continuous training and upgrading of skills to fit with market trends. So the upgrading of skills is not just seeing a training out there and going to do it. It is, okay, I noticed that recycling is using recycled material is a trend in the craft industry. But I don't know how to manipulate the recyclable material. That's not a skill that I learned when I was doing craft. So therefore, because there's a trend in recycled products, I now need to looking at training myself and my team in how to manipulate recycled materials, since that's the market trend. Formalized businesses receive more government support and are more appealing to international buyers. So we're talking about going into export markets. The buying behavior of buyers in export markets require doing business with a formalized, registered business with brands. That is what the international buying behavior is. So get formalized and get your brands. Social networks provide good support and strengthen lobbying. Consider focusing on a specific target market, as with the Indian case. I think that was a very interesting one. And look at specific product types collectively as a group to see how best you can build your market share in that specific product type. So I'm not sure if we're going to go in question and answer, but I'm sure that as we go into more information sharing sessions, we will then look at specific groups within the industry. So maybe we may need to speak to our ceramists and look at case studies for specifically for ceramists and jewelers and stuff like that. But this is just an overall case study analysis that gives some insight into what has made countries successful in craft industry. That's it for me. I'm not sure if there are any questions.
Thank you, Janine. Very insightful information there. Those case studies were interesting, and I kept hearing some of the things that are often said about our own gift and craft producers locally in terms of formalization, the lack of risk, the copying, that's the word I'll use, drawing inspiration from something someone has done rather than being inspired by what the market actually wants and needs. Um, Another thing that stood out for me was the branding. Very important. And I know that you in particular, you've always been emphasizing that to your team as well as the clients that the marketing services unit serves. Differentiation was big as well, and building market share. The investment in production equipment, I remember coming out of the North Coast Revitalization Project, craft revitalization project, that was something that was major in it, in which JBDC sought to upgrade the equipment that the selected participants were using to help them to be more innovative and productive and so on. So these case studies are applicable, and based on what you were saying, it sounds like there are a plethora of them out there that that our audience can benefit from, which is very, very interesting. We are now open for questions. You may type your question in the chat, or you may use the raise hand feature, and we will unmute you and you can speak directly to Janine. So whichever option you prefer, you may go ahead and do that for the next few minutes. She will take questions, comments, and so on. So the floor is now open. Janine, while we wait on them, I wanted to ask, what are some of the things that because you kept saying, look for case studies that are relevant to our context. And so I did hear some of some relevance here, but what for you would have been some of the points that really mirror what is happening in the Jamaican situation?
Well, I think for me, the application of export strategy to small and micro firms was huge, because we typically say that the firm must start locally and then grow to a particular size before they can look to take in on export. In these case studies, what we realize is that because of the collective action of many small firms, they were able to tackle exportation in the same way that a large firm would. Whether they were making the same product and grouping together to fill the quantity dynamics, or they were going after specific niche markets that they could attract high value. So that we know that the price for exporting is high, but because you're going after a high value market and a specific market, when we talk about that Indian case study where they were looking at worship items, I'm not sure how many of us as producers are thinking that's a market segment I can make a product for, because we have a lot of persons doing meditation now. How are we looking at making items that are suitable for that? So the notion that a micro firm or a small firm should develop its business model on the premise of exporting was huge. And what that would have forced you to do is that it would force you to look at the aspect of formalization, with not within pay tax and, you know, don't get caught by the police to shut you down, not from that space, but because a buyer that has a unique boutique shop in Germany is not gonna buy from you. You don't have a company name, you don't have any internet presence, you don't have a brand, they can't connect with it. These are some, I'm looking at it and I'm saying, what is this? These success factors are very business oriented. They really have nothing to do specifically with the craft industry, that the craft industry is unique in its experience. And so, you know, exporting craft is so hard and whatever. It's just that they are very focused, and they collaborate, they exchange ideas, they go outside of the box of what they know. That for me was why I zoned in on these particular case studies. There were other case studies, but the fact that I was identifying successful countries that were looking at SME, that SME group specifically as the reason for their success in craft development and their thrust for export coming from that, I think was inspiring. And that means that we can do that today. We can do it now. When you look at the issue of production and equipment, we are still using chisel and knife. I can tell you that. And not wrong if it's chisel and knife you have, but you need to look at transitioning eventually. And that means that if your skill was developed using those types of tools, you are going to have to go back to school and learn how do you do this now with a kiln? How do you do this now with a circular saw, you know? Because that is going to now give you room to create new products. And I think that we do have to now expand our thinking and not just say, okay, I'm a craft producer, I'm making this and I'm just locked in this little box and I'm going to sell to the nice tourists that come and I get, you know, maybe 20 might buy from me this month. When you're looking at an entire global market space that is willing to buy from you, because there is a market for it. And so I think that is one of the things I would definitely look at. But when I'm looking for a case study, specifically for my business now, I would want to look at, if you're saying jewelry, you may start there, case studies in jewelry, but then you may need to decide what kind of jewelry are you. Yes, what segment or classification of jewelry are you? And then you get more granular in your search and you state specifically what that is. What you're looking for. Are you looking for success stories? Are you looking for new trends? Are you looking, all of these things are case studies, but you need to determine what you need to know. And that's why I'm suggesting that entrepreneurs dedicate specific time to doing that. I say 2 days out of the month, you don't do any production, you don't do anything other than sit on your computer, or you talk to somebody in another country and ask them what's going on, video. chat them and let them go into a store and show you what's in there. There are so many innovative ways you can.
All right, thank you. We have associations locally, but let us address the effectiveness or lack thereof of the associations, as well as the unwillingness of some producers to join an association. Are you able to shed some light on those two things?
Well, I can't shed any light on that, but what I can shed light on is that we don't have much information on associations, and that in and of itself is a big problem. If you have an association, a body of producers that I'm sure they may be paying sub-monthly registration or membership fees and stuff like that, you have to make that association work for you. People have to know you want to attract quality members to that association. And if you want to attract quality members, then the content and the thrust of that association must be one that benefits me to join it. So when we talk about knowledge sharing, if that association is just meeting on a monthly or quarterly basis to update their information pool on what is happening in their unique sector, that's huge. That's something that I would want to go to because I may not have access to that information. So the fact that they were using associations and groups for knowledge sharing and exchanging of ideas was a huge benefit. Now, if I am saying that I am involved in the industry here locally, and I know the Potters Association because the Potters Association has an annual craft fair. And by virtue of that, now I know the members. And I know that, okay, if I want to find potters, I can contact the Potters Association. You want that information, that type of information visible everywhere. You want it on the internet. So a buyer might be saying, I wonder what sort of pottery is available. When they say pottery Jamaica, that association name should come up and you should have somebody that they can contact and a registry. And so it's not just about having the group, but organizing the group in such a way that it works for the members.
Great, thank you. We have Dana Baugh has raised her hand. Dana, I am going to unmute you and you may go ahead. Where is Dana? I lost Dana. Dana,
Hello.
you're unmuted.
Hi, morning, everyone.
Dana?
Thanks for having this session. Yes, are you hearing me?
Yes, we're hearing you.
Okay.
Okay, morning. Sorry. Thanks for having this session. I found the information very useful and very helpful. I agree with everything that was said in terms of working together as a collective, especially because it's something that I think we need to get to as a country in order to build the craft industry. I think it's more than just the craft industry. I just think I run a design-based business. I don't consider myself an artisan. I do work that is artisanal, but I run a design-based business. However, I don't know if there are any programs that JBDC can look at in linking the informal artisans and the informal segment of the industry with more formal businesses, because I am embarking on doing similar projects. However, I'm finding it difficult. I think the trust factor is very low amongst the stakeholders and the producers. One, because of this whole copying and imitation issue. So I don't know if there's a way to address that, and how do we plan on addressing it? Because I may have a design and I would want to work with somebody, but I do have the fear that if I go to someone with a design, they may either give that design to somebody else, try and produce it on their own. And so there is that trust factor, but also it's in the reverse where some people may not want to work with me because they think that I may be a bigger person that may be wanting to take advantage of them. So I don't know if there's any way that you can tackle this to kind of help it. Because I really would like to work with some smaller producers to expand my product line. I'm focused mainly on ceramics and I do lighting fixtures, but it would be great if I could work with other producers that at the point when I actually start supplying larger companies in the markets that I'm going to, I can also have a wider range. And I really don't necessarily want to have to do everything myself. And I think there's a lot of opportunity with partnering people who have the expertise and already have a certain design aesthetic that can produce things for me. So I don't know how JBDC could help to bridge that gap. Um, and if you could enlighten me if there are any programs that actually exist for that already so I can engage.
Well, thanks for that, Dana. It was one of the points that came out of the South Africa, the Cape Town case study, as one of the major success influencers. And so, the reason why we want to look and encourage participants and ourselves to look at case studies is because these are known to work. And I will have to speak more about a program because we would not have designed the program yet. But having identified that this is a
Okay.
methodology that has aided the success of the industry, then that's definitely something as an implementing agency we are going to have to look at. It's really about building the value chains, building the different players and respecting the different roles that they play. And creating a system for them to collaborate, because it's not going to happen naturally on the onset. And majority of these cases were supported by government influence. It's just that as it relates to government support, it is typically given to the formalized firm. And what they are challenging the formalized firms to do is to look at engaging informal firms to bring them into the supply chain in a particular way, with a view that over time, these informal firms will develop capacity. So you spoke about imitation and so on. It's really encouraging them. It's encouraging the informal producer to learn from the firm that is established, to develop their own competencies to become a established firm themselves. So it will have some gray areas as it relates to imitation and so, because they are actually learning by collaborating. And in learning by collaboration, they're not going to necessarily innovate right away. So they are going to be copying. I would say that maybe the only way to avoid that is looking at certainly public education. So we can look at that so that maybe as a topic of discussion that we can have, so that persons can see how it's putting their own success at risk. Because if you're not feeling confident and trusting them to engage them, they are not going to get the help they need now to build their capacity. So it's a win-win situation if we understand the position of each party. And that's one of the things we want to make sure that this session now goes into discussion forums with the different associations and so on. We need to hear, like you have shared with us, Dana, we need to hear that, and the informal producer needs to hear that and understand that's why they are not being engaged. And so that we can come up with some solutions now, how best to collaborate. I see JBDC as a good catalyst to bring the stakeholders together, but it's ultimately going to require relationships, and it's going to require risk taking. It's going to require the legal framework to manage it in the event that if it's breached, you can still take the risk because you know that if it is breached, there is a consequence to dealing with it. But if we as a collective don't start shifting our mindset to this kind of collaboration that we are talking about, we are not going to make it out of the pigeonhole that we are in, because we are going to need
Agree.
everybody on board to make it.
Yes, I agree. The other point I
Thank you,
wanted
Dana.
to
Thank you, Janine.
She had another point.
Okay, Dana, you can go ahead.
Another point was, I mean, I'm formalized. I consider myself a formal design-based business, but I'm finding it in terms of government support for the industry, and I feel like the JBDC is actually the best agency to deal with and to speak up for the industry when it comes to putting certain policy in place for us. And a few of those things that I feel is holding us back, that probably, I mean, they mentioned it there. You mentioned it that the government was integral in getting the industry um, the support it needed. But I feel like the perception is that this industry is a roadside hustle and it's not necessarily an industry. And everywhere else in the world, when you look at the craft sector or the design based industries and the creative industries all over they're multi-billion dollar businesses, and we buy craft products from India, from China, from Taiwan and everywhere else, and those people are making lots of money in selling craft. And I feel like we're importing all these products, but the government has not provided a framework to help us succeed. One of my main challenges I have and is with I'm online. I have a website. I do sales through my website, and I would say not where I want it to be, but quite successful in doing that over this corona period. I've had most growth and export sales I've had through my website through this COVID time. However, simple things like getting the things up out of the country. The government it charges 25 US dollars, 3,005 Jamaican dollars on a shipment that's valued at 100 US, or if it's 6 items. I mean, that's not necessary for a small e-commerce export trade. Things like, not investing in the post office so that we have another alternative to FedEx and DHL that's reliable, that's efficient, putting in some kind of policy in place to support e-commerce growth and trade, allowing us to be able to accept payment. I mean, there are just so many things that I feel like it's not being looked at, and I'm ready to go and I really want the support, but I just feel like it's so hard and very discouraging at times. And I don't know if there's any way that you guys can help to speed up that process to make us more competitive, because all of these things, yes, we can charge a higher price point, but at the same time, it's just too difficult to operate and to be able to run a successful business when it comes down to the the financial aspect of it, because those things affect your bottom line. If I have to pay that money for a customs administration fee for a small order, it cuts severely into my profit, which is a very small margin to begin with. So I don't know if there's any assistance that can be given in that area, or if there's a way for you to push the government to give us more support where we need it.
Well, my answer to that is that the craft policy is a first step, and that's engagement and having a deeper understanding of some of the issues that you raised, Dana, and how pervasive is that issue. So we have one person saying that this is an issue that they think that the government should invest in the post office for supporting logistics. This is logistics that you're speaking of. If we get 100 more voices saying that, then that is where you are going to be able to have a JBDC represent on your behalf, because this is such a pervasive issue. On the matter of payment, I know that in terms of payment gateway and facilitating transactions on e-commerce platforms, that is something that JBDC is actively engaged in doing now. And as soon as we are completed with the process, we will speak more on that. And that's really because it was eyeballed and the information came in that this was a major barrier to accessing markets. And so we have partnered with some stakeholders that will be able to help our clients to get that done. So I would challenge again that the policy and the establishment of the policy and the move towards implementation is going to address that in some way, shape, or form. But also, how do we get the information flow coming in from the players, the actual producers, the actual business owners, to see collectively what are the main pervasive issues preventing them from growing, preventing them from exporting, so that we can see in a bigger picture of just what things that as a government we need to focus on. So it's kind of like a two-way dialogue. And I'm sure that some of the issues that you raised in terms of logistics and e-commerce and so on does not just reside in the craft industry, but certainly in agro-processing and other sectors as well. So if we can hear the information, and this is why we are sort of zoning in on the whole association thing, because it's difficult to hear that information as from an individual SME. It needs to be something that the associations sit with, discuss, put forward proposals, and lobby. And a JBDC now, having heard that voice, can make representation in the form of creating, recommending policies and recommending implementation strategies to eliminate them, because as a country we would benefit. So I think maybe that is something that we would want to achieve from this policy, that we will get the collective action, we will hear the voices, we will get all the stakeholders involved, and that would give JBDC a better footing to represent.
Okay.
Thank you. A very robust discussion. I can hear the passion coming from Dana as a producer, as well as Janine as a business development service provider. Awesome. Thank you, Dana, for engaging us like that. I have a question from Jennifer Jones. My business generates a lot of coconut shells from coconut oil production and would like to partner with craft makers who specialize in coconut craft. I would purchase some specialized items from the interested party to sell under my brand. What assistance can JBDC offer to network with these persons?
What I would say to that is, in the same way that you would have sent us the information here, we would have had a list of producers that work with coconut. And then we can look at bridging the gap by introducing you. That is one way. But certainly, maybe we can look at a sort of registry of suppliers and producers and see how best we can facilitate linkages for producers to access raw materials. And for yourself, from what I'm understanding, because you have a line of coconut oil products, you would want to complement that line with craft items made from coconut to show the value added. So that's a huge, a very good business strategy. So it's just a matter of giving us your contact details and us identifying producers that are doing that and making the contact for you. And that's what JBDC is there for. So you can email us at info@jbdc.net. No, info@jbdc.net as a general email, or you can check out our website, www.jbdc.net, and then we can make contact like that.
All right, thank you, Janine. Lisa Calendar, your hand is up. I am going to unmute you and you may go ahead.
Yes, good morning, everybody. Thank you, JBDC, for facilitating this dialogue. Are you hearing me well?
Yes, loud and clear.
Okay, great. I wanted to thank you, Janine, for the presentation with the case studies. I think one thing I want to throw into the discussion, which I guess may be something that I do buy into, this idea of associations, and actually all over the world, unfortunately, trust is very, very weak in our national context here, but I will say in terms of export development, associations are very critical all over the world. And as we move, one of the main things that holds us back from doing better in trade and scaling our businesses is that we don't speak as associations. We speak as a group of persons who come together for expediency, but not people who have come together with a clear strategy and focus and plan in mind, and a commitment to each other in terms of moving forward. So I would say, from my knowledge of export development, the notion of associations is quite critical, and any government anywhere in the world, they will always have to be relating to associations as opposed to individual persons. You can only go so far in terms of supporting the individual business or the individual person. But when associations lobby and are able to put forward a position, governments, not just in our local or national context, but in terms of trying to penetrate export markets, governments do relate more to associations than individual businesses. But what I wanted to contribute to the discussion is the idea of skills. So many years ago, I also had the vision of building a business, a design-related business in Jamaica. One of the issues is that there is a kind of disconnect between what we know as craft and where the world is going in terms of design. And one of the key issues is skills. So many years ago, what I wanted to do was to build a core productive capability and then train people who would link to my production, either as workers or as contractors. Because as a small business, I think you have to begin maybe with contracting before going into employees, because your cash flow is not usually stable enough for you to take on all the requirements of employees. So one of the things I wanted to do was to have a production facility and train persons who would work in that facility. And one of the issues you'll find in Jamaica is that, I guess because of our incredible talent, everybody wants to work for themselves and be an entrepreneur. So it's actually very difficult to find people to work for you, whether it's issues of personality or who knows, but it's very, our cultural focus is not towards production. We are very good at doing one-offs. And so trying to hire people who will produce things according to a pattern or produce the same thing consistently is like running uphill with something tied around you. So one of the issues I think we need to begin to work on as an association, as JBDC, is getting that database, not just of formal businesses, but of skills. Where are the students who graduate each year from Edna Manley College and do fantastic final year work? Do they all migrate, or are some of them still in Jamaica working in other jobs apart from jobs in the arts, in the visual arts? So I think we need to begin to build a database of skills. Who in Jamaica can do what? What processes are you able to actually do? And then we can map better the industry, not just as businesses, because it is possible to be a sole trader business and thrive. It is possible to be an individual artist or craftsperson and make a living. But who can do what? And I don't think we have anywhere a skills database of people who have been trained, so people who graduate from the Edna Manley College with qualifications, but then also many people who have been trained overseas, and many people who are not trained, but who may not have been formally trained, because there are different things you get from formal training, but there are some people who are self-taught, and these days there's stuff on YouTube, and people can learn to do craft skills. But where is the group of people who would like to work in that area? So that people who are willing to go forward and form businesses and invest capital can then look towards this group of people as subcontractors. And I don't think we have done that in the arts. We haven't done it in the crafts. Doesn't exist at all in design. People know other people and they sort of know of people. But in terms of professionalizing the whole thing and having a database of skills, even the JBDC, I've participated in several fantastic short courses held at the Incubator and Resource Center. We leave those courses and many of us have another day job. So we do things like from time to time, but maybe if we were in a database of persons practicing who, as Janine is saying, we can meet regularly, we can have meetings, we can have a core group, maybe we would do more work, and maybe we should be doing joint exhibitions, even virtually. Kingston Creative has started another movement. Again, it's a movement of more, we are facing the international market without having our back office in order. So if someone says, where are all the people in the Ministry of Culture also has a registry. It's really a registry of entertainers, but visual artists are allowed to be on it. Where we are out there talking about exports and Kingston Creative and all of this, but where is the group of people in Jamaica who are artists? Where is the group of people who can actually do production and who are interested in being trained by people who have the technical skills? I don't think we have that as yet. So I think that's a great area where JBDC and this association, which is to be formed, can start by having a database and an inventory of the skills, and maybe build it in a way so that people can also show their work, because I don't want to hire this person unless I see what they can do. And process and technique is very fundamental to design. So not because you are trained in one area that you know anything about another area, but it would give you an opportunity to maybe be trained in another area or work with a business that is looking for skills. So that area is a real weakness in Jamaica. And we tend to talk about formal businesses, which I'm not taking anything away from what Janine said. But I think a big mistake is facing the export market and having all these movements that are, in terms of visibility, everything looks good. But then if someone calls from France and says, I need people to do metal work for me, who are the people in Jamaica? We have no idea where those people are. Some of them have migrated, some of them have other day jobs. Where are the people? Where's the association of craft workers? And I think we have to also think about building it on that level, not just about formal businesses, which is important to the government, but also about skills. Thank you. And congrats for hosting the dialogue, because I think we need a lot more constructive dialogue as well. There are people like myself, I shy away from talk shops. I really assess carefully what I give my time to. But I think without having a structured dialogue and a constructive dialogue, we won't be able to get much further than where we are. And I think all of us as individual businesses are struggling. And it's not because we're sole trader businesses. It's not because of COVID. It's not because we lack vision. It's not because we can't produce or we don't have ideas. It's not because we don't know people and have the right connections. It's because, as Dana said, it's really, really very difficult to run a business with everything that you have in terms of obligations. And it's also very difficult to have people speaking at you who have never run a business, have never spent a day in business in their life. So they don't know what it is to risk all your savings in a venture and then face a market that's very uncertain. They don't know what it is to get up every day and have to look for that $10 that's gonna pay the bill that's coming in tomorrow. So I think these associations are really a way forward. And I congratulate JBDC as one of the few agencies that does not speak at business, but really tries to help us. But we also need a lot more. Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much, Lisa. I will hand over to Janine to see if she has any comments on what you said just now.
I had my pen and my little book making the notes because I am really excited about the feedback. We have some ideas of what persons are facing, but when you hear it and when you hear where persons really want us to focus on in terms of the interventions that we are to develop, it gives me a sense of a more structured idea of how JBDC can support. And so we're not implementing, this is good. That's all I can say. It's good. It means that we are not going to be implementing the policy in isolation of what is the reality on the ground, and that we are getting really constructive inputs. I had a similar thought, Dana. I noticed in the chat you spoke about heart. And when the moment Lisa brought up the matter of skills, I thought heart is a major contributor to the development of the policy and a major stakeholder. So it means now that as JBDC, when we engage with a heart, we can say to them that, look, this is what is happening. These are the dynamics. We don't know where the skills are. We have a deficit of certain types of skills. We are not matching these skills, and we need to upgrade skills in design and so on, and have a much more fulsome conversation with heart to guide them as a development agency as to how heart now can implement programs to push the thing forward. Because I think at the end of the day, when JBDC took on the implementation of this policy, one of the things we definitely, well, I certainly cannot function without implementation. Talking, it's not useful to me. So to have really brass tacks root things that we can put in place, and they are so doable. In my mind, they are very doable. It's really just knowing now that JBDC, there's an expectation that we need to pull everybody together. And I think we are up to the task, and we are hearing the points, making a note of all the points being placed in the chat to put forward the recommendations to implement and move this thing forward.
Great, thanks, Janine. I see Lisa adding more in the chat, saying heart is very important because young people don't want to invest their time in training unless they can access some form of job-related certification. And yes, Heart Trust is a close ally of JBDC. All right. I don't know if there are any more questions. Janine, there's something I wanted to ask you. I know JBDC plays an integral role in the what do you call that exercise, the assessment of producers who want to be featured in the Christmas in July event and catalog. The catalog was just released a few days ago, I think. Will be on our website soon. On the matter of differentiation, we've been doing this a couple of years. Are you seeing any improvements in that in terms of differentiation, what's coming on, particularly given the proliferation of youth in the gift and craft sector?
The short answer is yes, there is significant innovation first and differentiation coming out of that segment of producers, millennials, Gen Z. A lot more experimentation. Also, the fact that a number of them would have received technical training. So we have Edna Manley putting out quite a number of skilled young artisans that are willing to go into entrepreneurship. They are really doing an excellent job at promoting that now at Edna Manley to transition the students into entrepreneurship. But what I will say that maybe while we have differentiation taking place, what is missing from the equation is the connection to markets. And in the presentation, we identified that as a main ingredient for the success, that they were not innovating from a place of creativity and ideation. They were innovating from a place of market need, market trends, and what was happening in the market space, what were consumer behavior statistics telling them. And so as a result of that, by the time they would have innovated and differentiated, the product solution now that they would come up with is in tandem with what the market is looking for. So I think the missing ingredient for us, I would say, once we have come out of the traditional space and have gone into contemporary product development now, which we see the younger generation doing, yes, they're doing it, but we're still lacking in matching what is happening in the market space. So if the ideation and creativity is coming from the individual, what they like, what they are inspired by. But now you have to do a harder sell. You have to try to position it after it has been created to fit into something that the market can recognize, versus really just listening, conversing, understanding what consumers are willing to engage with, and then differentiate and innovate in that space. So that's the part that I think is missing. But certainly for me as a contributor, JBDC as a contributor to the Christmas in July venture, when we had about 60% of the entrants in 2020 being new entrants in a time when we were doing our first virtual show, that's excellent. But we have not really successfully transitioned that to real commerce. We're talking about export. So therefore, by the time you have invested in this product, you must have a sense of what the market is going to do in relation to this product. And I think we are not really engaging the market space as much. We are engaging the creativity. We are looking at innovation, yes, but we're not connected to the market. And that is what's going to be critical for the success.
Great. On that matter of export, Janine, what role does e-commerce play in a situation like this, when or producers aren't necessarily exporting on their own, and we have the launch of thingsjamaicансhopping.com in 2020? What role does that a site like the TJ e-commerce site play in this process?
Well, the biggest brand goal for Things Jamaican is to foster collaboration, to foster a sort of one platform that persons can leverage on to just go in. And so when we created the website, the long-term vision is that we want to have a virtual mall, because we know that not everybody is going to want to create. First of all, people don't buy that way. So that's the first thing. So we have to talk about the market first. The market goes on a platform to shop. They don't go searching for individual products all over the place. So what you find is that even though it is beneficial for the entrepreneur to have their website, it is good for them to be connected to another one. So we have persons connected to Amazon, and Think Jamaican is saying we want you to connect through us as well, so that we can do one market thrust, one marketing thing to say, look, if you want Jamaican products, this is the platform, right? So yes, I encourage individual entrepreneurs to create their websites, and we encourage them to link their websites, their social media pages to the Things Jamaican website to route it to, and we can take on the logistics of it, because that's part of the support that JBDC is offering. So e-commerce is also a very good strategy for brand development. And you know I am on brand. At the end of the day, no matter what you produce in terms of it, yes, good quality and all of that, what remains constant in the customer's mind is a brand name. Just like I can call you Suzette and you can call me Janine. Once I connect with that brand, I'm going to start looking for what the brand is putting out. And over time, once that brand presence is established, then their individual e-commerce platforms will grow in terms of the brand. So it doesn't matter if it's e-commerce, if it's a retail shop, if it's, whatever it is, the presence of the brand is critical. So while I support the thrust that we are all abuzz now with e-commerce and so on, I will caution persons to remember that there is still a strategy that is required behind that platform. It's not just to create the website and put the products up. You have to be engaging with the market. The market must know about you. There must be a relationship. There are conduits like ourselves, Things Jamaican. And I mean, if Amazon is what works in terms of your product type, you can look at the particular platforms that are suitable for your product type and the market that it's attracting, and go through those things. And nothing is stopping you from doing multiple channels. So, but once we start talking about e-commerce, what e-commerce does, and we spoke a little bit about the value chain, it gives you immediate access to the value chain. And buyers, where we would have normally been dependent on a buyer, where the buyer is a buyer's market, and if the buyer does not like it, it does not go into their store. E-commerce eliminates that and gives you direct access to the customer. So therefore, it's now even more critical for us to understand the consumer, understand their buying behavior. And you can use your performance on e-commerce to engage buyers. Whereas in the past, the buyer is at risk because he or she is not sure how well your product is going to do on the market. Your e-commerce performance, you can give them statistics, data. And a lot of persons are not paying attention to the back-end data that is being generated. You may not receive an order, but you may get a statistics report that says where the customers that are coming on your landing page, where they are coming from. It suggests interest. And over time, you will be able to identify unique markets that you can now go after and target outside of e-commerce. So I would talk about e-commerce and social media, digital marketing generally. It's a good platform for data management and data generation, and can go feedback into your strategy. But e-commerce has opened up export, and that I think is why SMEs can talk about being exporters now, And so even in terms of e-commerce being a platform or a channel to retailers, it provides you the opportunity to send a box instead of a container. So we really need to explore the benefits of this and then look at how we package it, how we collaborate, how we use different ones, because one e-commerce site may not be it. You may need to still collaborate on other sites and look at those strategies. And we'll do webinars and sessions that will go into that.
Awesome. Thank you, Janine. All right, so we're going to be wrapping up now. It's almost 12 o'clock. It's almost lunchtime. We've been at it for 2 hours, almost 2 hours. And that's actually a good thing. I'm just going to wrap up with a few comments. As Elisa Calendar on the training thing, again, saying perhaps a partnership with City and Guilds would be useful. Also mentioning EMC, because Heart may take a long time to get the full picture. I see Dana saying e-commerce is essential to export growth for small business. Diversification of e-commerce channels is great, but having my own site has been integral to my success this year. I also use Etsy and a few other platforms, but my main focus is my site. Maxine says my issue is with capacity. We should use this slow time in tourism to improve on that. I usually have big groups, and it is very hard for me for small producers to deliver the amounts needed in time, even if they are provided with the order in advance. Very often it feels like it is a burden to them, not a step forward. All right. Okay. All right. It's 12 o'clock, and as lovely as this discussion has been, it is time for me to bid you adieu. And to wish you a great rest of the day, and also to see you again next week. And as you seek to collaborate, do share this with your fellow producers, entrepreneurs. We are here every Thursday at Thursday with the JBDC Virtual Gift and Craft Biz Zone. And we also have another version of the Biz Zone that is for a general audience on Tuesdays at 10 and 1 o'clock. Those are two, all right? We meet again tomorrow at 12 o'clock for the Entrepreneur's Journey, where incidentally we will feature Lacey and Bartley, who is Managing Director of Bartley's All in Wood. All right, so do join us, stay with us, and spread the word. Don't be mean with the information. Follow us on all social media channels. JBDC is everywhere. Visit our website at jbdc.net. Follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, YouTube. We are on all major social media platforms. The great thing about this is that you can find this presentation again in a couple of days on YouTube, JBDC Jamaica. Subscribe so that you never miss anything. All right. And like I said, share it like good news. On behalf of JBDC, I want to thank you for your participation. Thank you for the feedback. Continue to tell us continue to give us the feedback that you think will help us to develop your businesses. And have a good day. See you next week. Bye.